simplifying a complex, confusing world. The Explainers, only on the Podcaster.
The 4-day week. Is it a utopian ideal or a pragmatic approach to modern workplaces? Picture this. Your week begins on Monday, wraps up on Thursday, and then you take some time off during your 3-day weekend. Sounds like an ideal week, right? You can already see yourself all charged up for next week. What if you could have this in every one of the 52 weeks that make up your year? The 4-day week is an intriguing concept. Multiple trials of the 4-day week across countries indicate that a 4-day week could lead to improved productivity amongst employees, no drop in revenue, increased participation in the workplace, and, of course, more loyalty from the employees. Welcome to the Explainers on the Podcaster. In this episode, we're taking a look at the 4-day week. Now, I don't claim the 4-day week is becoming a thing, but it's definitely something many people around the world are considering seriously. This month, the United Kingdom will begin a 6-month trial of a 4-day work week for about 1,000 people across sectors. We will look at that and more in this podcast as we explore why employees everywhere are trying to break out of the confines of a 5-day week. This could sufficiently piss off some 70-hour workweek advocates enough to ruin their weekend. You get that? So for them, we'll also talk about a development they might appreciate. Greece is flirting with the idea of a 6-day work week, but more on that later. Breaking free of the grind. Back to the United Kingdom and the new Labour government's 4-day week pilot project that will present its findings to the government in the summer of 2025. The trial will include 17 businesses that will mostly implement the 4-day week, and some that have opted to test a shorter working week in which workers get an extra day off every 2 weeks. This trial will include flexible working policies, flexible start and finish times, a 9-day fortnight or compressed hours when people work the same number of hours but over fewer days. The most important point here, there will be no change in pay. This is not the first such attempt in the United Kingdom. In 2022, 61 companies took part in a similar project and, according to The Guardian, 54 had maintained it a year and a half later. News reports claim that approximately 200 British businesses, quote-unquote, have switched to a 4-day week permanently. A report on the outcome of the 2022 trial noted that, quote, some of the most extensive benefits of shorter working hours were found in employees' well-being. Before and after data shows that 39% of employees were less stressed and 71% had reduced levels of burnout at the end of the trial. Likewise, levels of anxiety, fatigue, and sleep issues decreased, while mental health and physical health both improved. End quote. There have been trials in other countries and the results were promising. In 2021, Iceland ran a trial with over 2,500 public sector workers, and the experiment was a hit. Reduced stress, higher job satisfaction, and no drop in productivity. The results were so positive that about 86% of Iceland's workforce now has the option to work shorter hours without a pay cut. Not too shabby, I say. In Japan, Microsoft experimented with a 4-day week and found a 40% boost in productivity. Yes, you heard that right, a 40% jump. And the benefits weren't just personal. Companies saved on resources like electricity and office supplies, making this model attractive from an environmental perspective as well. In Sweden, the government conducted a study from 2015 to 2017 for a shorter working week. Nurses at care homes worked only 6 hours for 5 days a week instead of the usual 8 hours. The results showed that the nurses arranged 85% more activities for their patients, recorded fewer sick days, and reported better mental health. Since returning to the 8-hour days, the nurses reported having less time for their families and being overly tired throughout the week. Let's move to Spain, New Zealand, and even parts of the United States. Now, these are also testing the model. Spain's government is funding a national trial to encourage companies to experiment with 4-day schedules without wage cuts. These trials are creating a growing body of evidence that a 4-day work week could work on a larger scale. Of course, not everyone is convinced, and the skepticism is warranted, understandably. We have a functioning 5-day work week, and that serves us well. Why tamper with what's working, right?
We help you understand the world. The Explainers, only on the Podcaster.
We weren't always like this. Speaking of working well, let's do a quick dive into something we take for granted, the 5-day week. So, the Monday to Friday grind that we construct our life around, right? It's relatively a new phenomenon and it's just about 100 years old. In the 19th century, workers typically labored 6 days a week, often up to 16 hours a day. The idea of time off didn't really exist. People were constantly working, especially during the Industrial Revolution. Henry Ford first instituted a 6-day, 48-hour work week for male factory workers at the Ford Motor Company in 1914. In 1926, he introduced a 5-day, 40-hour work week. Not really out of the kindness of his heart, but because he believed that well-rested workers were more productive. Skeptics say Ford also saw the potential for people to spend more time and money on leisure, including Ford cars, you guessed it. In any case, his experiment worked so well that it became the norm in the United States by the 1930s. The Washington Post reports that even back then, quote, critics were skeptical they could be productive enough to make up the difference, end quote. That's right. Critics didn't want workers to have a 2-day weekend. So, that's where the origins of our 9-to-5, 40-hour work week lies. And here we are, nearly a century later, in our cubicles, peering into electronic screens, working the same hours Ford set up in a very different world. So, it's not just about tampering with what's working. The 4-day week is about adapting to new realities. In our times, with the shift to remote work, constant connectivity, the growing demand for work-life balance, and the rise of artificial intelligence, companies have to consider the 5-day week is outdated. Given that in just a few decades, humanity has progressed from gas and oil lamps to AI that's on the cusp of taking over many jobs actually, there's a larger conversation that's to be had about workplaces and work itself. Sam Altman, one of the biggest names in AI, tweeted recently, and I quote, OpenAI now generates about 100 billion words per day. All people on Earth generate about 100 trillion words per day. End quote. So there's definitely a change coming. And the conversation about working hours will need to be seriously considered, and soon at that. As one of the participating companies in the United Kingdom 2022 trial said, and I quote, the 4-day week isn't just about a day off, it's mental reboot. End quote. Forbes magazine listed the 4-day week as one of the main trends to watch in 2024, and one can expect this trend to gain momentum going forward. Well, at least reduced working hours, if not an actual 4-day week. Speaking of work-life balance, Greece enacted a new employment law earlier this year that laid out a 6-day work week. The Greek government said the initiative became necessary due to systemic changes like a shrinking population and shortage of skilled workers. According to a report in the Guardian newspaper, I quote, the 6-day scheme, officials say, will only apply to private businesses providing round-the-clock services. Under the extended working week, staff in selected industries and manufacturing facilities will have the option of working an additional 2 hours a day or an extra 8-hour shift rewarded with a top-up fee of 40% added to the daily wage. End quote. This has not been a popular measure though. Greeks work the longest hours in Europe, an average of 41 hours per week according to the EU's statistics agency, and they reportedly get paid much less while working more. Is it any wonder Greek youth have been emigrating out of the country for several years now? But what's in it for the employers? Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room, wages. One of the biggest sticking points with the 4-day work week is wages. Many of these trials adopt a 100-80-100 model, 100% pay for 80% of the hours, with the expectation of maintaining 100% productivity. Companies in the United Kingdom trial found that the productivity boost offset the cost of maintaining full pay for a shorter work schedule. Some even reported revenue increases during the trial, suggesting that happy, well-rested employees may be worth the investment. However, some employers, especially in the service industries, argue this isn't financially sustainable. For roles that need constant coverage, think healthcare, retail, or customer service, for example, having fewer workdays could mean hiring extra staff or adjusting shifts, which can add costs. Some economists point out that the 4-day week could lead to quote-unquote invisible overtime, where employees feel pressure to get more done in less time, essentially packaging 5 days worth of work into 4. So, burnout city once again, I guess. Critics worry that shifting entire industries to a shorter week could require significant adjustments. For some companies, the transition could mean rethinking workflows or even redesigning jobs. Yet, as the labor market evolves, with younger workers prioritizing flexibility and well-being, the 4-day week may be an attractive strategy for retaining talent in an increasingly competitive market. Now, that's not just PR speak, by the way. Younger generations are driving this change, seeking work-life balance and mental health as top priorities over traditional perks. Some surveys even suggest that up to 75% of millennials would consider leaving their job if it meant achieving a better balance. In the United Kingdom trial of 2022, attrition rates dropped by 57%. While the 4-day work week might not be feasible for every industry, these trials suggest it's a sustainable and potentially profitable approach in many settings. If these trends continue, we may see more legislation supporting flexible work models, just as Ford's 5-day week reshaped the 20th century. So, it's a complex issue with support in many quarters.
Simplifying a complex, confusing world. The Explainers, only on the Podcaster.